what maybe is something that doesn't sort of leap off the page about the Green New Deal, I think, is that it's so encompassing in some ways. And not everyone who's going to be supporting it is going to be in it for the same reason or reach the same conclusions. But if you think about the environmental side and the need for some action on climate and the environmental justice movement and the worker justice movement, the social justice movement, what strikes me is that in its biggest sense, it really is calling for transformational change in Virginia. And I think in America, we don't have a lot of good examples of smooth transformational change. I know in Virginia we don't. So I guess I'm wondering, do we need to, in addition to worrying about the issues and the legislation and all that, think about how do we achieve some kind of transformational change? For good goals, but is that even possible? Are we deluding ourselves?
Well, I think the legislation that's likely to pass in Virginia is not the Green New Deal bill. There's a broad environmental bill sponsored by a number of people in the House of Delegates, but primarily from this area, Delegate Rip Sullivan, and in the Senate, Jennifer McClellan. And it is a very encompassing, forward-thinking bill that I personally support.
Right.
They're still working out some of the details. For instance, what exactly is clean energy? Ivy Main from the Sierra Club has done a good job of trying to explain to many of the policymakers that biomass is not clean energy. When you're burning wood pulp and cutting down trees to find clean energy, that's not clean energy.
Right.
Then the question of whether nuclear power, although it's carbon-free, is clean energy, which probably ultimately they will determine is for this bill, but some of us have differing opinions on that. So I think that the legislation that's going to go through in Virginia is fairly mainstream. It's not something that the average person will notice, except for if they want to start using clean energy.
Right.
If they start wanting to use solar, it'll be a lot easier for them to do. If they want to get an electric vehicle, there's a bill out there, David Reed out in Loudoun County is sponsoring that might give you a rebate on that. Electric charging stations, furthering that, the state's talking about that. So these are not radical things that are going to change anybody's lives. It's just giving people more options, and for those that are just continuing to live as they normally would, a certain percentage of their power, unbeknownst to them, will be coming from renewable sources if this bill passes.
Right. I've even noticed charging stations becoming more prevalent now.
Yeah.
And that can be a barrier to someone trying to make that
It's a little
decision.
tricky. Some of them you have to pay for, some of them you don't.
Right.
So that's an issue too. Holly, I didn't mean to take away from
Oh,
you.
no, it's okay. Sorry, the last few days I've just been steeped in bills, so I'm trying. I think, I don't know, like I think with CEA, Clean Economy Act, you know, I think the goals are a little timid in the sense of that it's not really meeting what the scientists are really requiring, the times that calls for action right now. But I think going back to your question, if is transformative change possible? I don't know, I've thought about this a lot, and I really think that it's up to us whether we believe it's possible or not. I think we tend to, I think we're used to kind of like talking ourselves out of, you know, believing that things are possible, because, you know, whether the politicians or the policymakers say, well, that's not possible. But beyond, like, you know, the practical aspect of implementing something, whether it's possible, I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy as well, because we tell ourselves, this is not possible, this is too much, this is too extreme. I think what's possible is based in our head, in a sense, to a point. And I think if we really do want that change, if we all stood up for it, that it can happen. And the thing is, I think people keep on getting stuck on the Green New Deal not being possible because it's so different from any other things that, you know, previous to this in terms of the way policy happens, you know. And I think because it's so intersectional in the way it tries to address multiple issues at the same time, I don't think we've been brought up to think in that way, to address an issue in that sense. You know, I think traditional policy tends to be very siloed, and also the way politics works, you know. But, you know, the human condition is not siloed. You know, the way we are in the world. I mean, think of nature, think of ecosystems, you know, everything's interconnected. And in a way, human societies is not separated into issues. And so if we come from that angle and look at the Green New Deal in that sense that, you know, we are trying to address the human issue in a very humanistic, holistic way. I think you start to begin to see that, you know, the possibilities of how this can work out. But that's just my the way I think of it.
Well, if this bill passes in Virginia, maybe it wouldn't be transformational, but as far as my observation of environmental policy in Virginia, this is transformational. That doesn't mean you can't build on it and do better in the future.
Sure.
But going from where we are now to what this bill includes puts us from being near the bottom as far as good environmental policy towards the upper end, not the very top, but towards the upper end. So that still gives us some room. But give that a little bit more time. This is an amazing change for a 1-year delta between last year and this year. As far as Green New Deal, we have a lot of problems, both in Virginia and in our nation, that hopefully lawmakers will eventually work on solving. But when you talk about survival of the planet through moving towards renewable energy and reducing the heat levels, eventually this has got to be a bipartisan issue. When I say bipartisan, I'm not thinking we have 100% support from the Republican Party, but if we could even get 10% support from the Republican Party, that is critical. There is a person in Virginia, Jim Smallwood. He's in Arlington. He's the former chair of the Republican Party, and he has a nonprofit dedicated to trying to convince conservatives to address climate change issues. I don't think it's going that well so far, but the fact that he and other conservatives are trying to make progress in this area is something that we need to encourage, because survival of the planet should be something that all of us agree on.
Right. Which is, I wonder to what extent young people in our country, and also Virginia, are doing a better job of agreeing on some of that reality, and not being so divided about the challenge or the reality. Maybe having some political differences as well. I'm not going to claim that all young people.
Not everybody is going to agree on healthcare policy, whether we should have take away private health insurance and have national health care, such as Senator Sanders proposes. So I'm not saying that there's merit in that argument, but it's certainly, if you try to mix these social justice issues in with environmental policy, even though you can logically make a connection, you're less likely to try to bring along some people that aren't with you now, and we'll never get to that transformational stage unless we convince some people that have yet to be convinced.
We also don't want to lose opportunities. You know, pursuing the renewables is less of a burden on local communities, and part of the problem we have with environmental justice is things like pipelines and compressor stations become such a burden on particular communities. So
pipelines is environmental policy. We should all be against the pipelines
because
that encourages more fossil fuels. So, as far what I'm saying is, there's many equity, financial, labor issues that people might want to tie together with environmental policy, which I can see the logic in that. but that is less likely to bring people on to further progressive environmental policy. So I think they need to be separated.
Alan? Okay, you want to say something different?
Well, I don't know whether I entirely agree with that, just because, let's take, mass transit, I feel like that is a really great example of how tackling this, you get two birds with one stone, or multiple birds with one stone, in the sense of, transportation is a massive greenhouse gas contributor. Terrible putting cars all on the road. But it creates traffic congestion, and it's a cost to the economy if everybody's stuck in traffic all day long, and air pollution and health. So, and then folks who, and because of the housing crisis and the cost of living closer to the urban center is more expensive, people who can't afford it have to live further out, but then they don't have options for transportation, they can't afford a car, and yet there's no trains and mass transit. So tackling that, you're going to get so many great results, right? And essentially what is creating global warming is our human activities, right? So we have to look at all aspects of what we're doing, what we consume, what we buy, how we move, how we live, our environment. So, but then when we integrate smart urban planning into this, we're not just addressing the climate issues, we're increasing climate resiliency, we're also going to improve people's health, we are going to help socioeconomic inequities, as people would be able to find jobs and live further out where it's cheaper and commute, and then you're taking more cars off the road and less traffic fatalities and things like that. And so you're addressing economic issues, social issues, maybe racial segregation, by default of wealth, at the same time as addressing climate. So to me, that's a great opportunity. Like I see this, like, if we're talking about selling it, it's like, why wouldn't we want this? This is like a great opportunity, economic opportunity, as well. So you're investing, it might seem expensive up front, but you're really, the cost, all these things is costing us, right? Continuing this way is really costing us, whether it's asthma, people's health, or economic costs, right? So we're addressing that. Another thing that I geek out about is the food system. Why are we not thinking about supporting sustainable agriculture, not just as a way to heal the land and address climate issues, but investing in our health? Because if we're eating food that is grown without all these pesticides and fertilizers, right? People are healthier. They're not going to need to go see the doctor as much. Right. And so that's going to cut down on healthcare costs. So it's an investment in multiple ways. There's like, so many benefits that are going to come out of it. So I view these things as kind of like fine examples of the Green New Deal approach, is thinking about these things in a different way, right?
All of the things you mentioned affect global warming.
Right.
So
Right.
you can say transportation policy,
Right.
certainly.
Right.
Local land use policy certainly is affect. What we eat, our food system certainly is affects climate change. So but you almost need to address those issues separately, just as you need to address the energy issues separately, which are being done now, even though in a way they're all connected. What I'm saying is there's some issues related to just equity as far as how much money people might make, minimum wage, labor issues. All of those are important, but you're not going to get bipartisan support for those most likely.
Well, I mean, you know, like with the Green New Deal, the vision, is not just one piece of legislation anyway. There's
Right.
multiple pieces, and you know, the repeal right to work is one bill.
Right.
You know, we got the minimum wage bills, that's separate. You know, so I mean, it doesn't all have to come as an omnibus bill like this.
Right.
You know, I mean,
That's what I'm
really,
saying. I
I
think
mean,
I
yeah.
think we're in agreement there.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, there are stuff that are passed out in individual bills.
Right.
In legislation.
Get bipartisan support where you can, where you can't.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you still don't attempt to move forward,
Mhm.
but you're likely to make less progress.
Mhm.
This week, actually, I was at there's an organization that's constructing a new building in Alexandria they employ about 1,500 or so people. And I was there for the town hall style briefing of this project.
Mhm.
And what struck me was the extent to which they were really going out of their way, and I'm talking about the board of directors and leadership of the organization, to solicit employee input on a lot of issues related to building design. And they even were up front, even though a lot of the people in the leadership are as old as I am, or about my age, you know, so we're at the tail end of our working life. They were up front with talking about, they presented the results of the survey, and they were highlighting that the younger part of the workforce had weighed in more. And that was important to them. Not because they want to ignore people like me who work there. I don't work there, but because they're building a building for 40 years. They want to hear what some of their 20s. And it seems to me that kind of participatory, open, sort of organizational approach is where a lot of the stuff would get sold. Because one of the things they talked about was they're going to be having a bigger fitness center than they have in the current building, because that's something that young people are going to think about in terms of health.
Right.
But the approach to transportation, the approach to lighting the building, the approach to all these technologies, I think typically younger people grab and adopt more easily. So I kind of feel like if we can somehow promote that sort of, I would just call it a very democratic organizational approach in our construction and in our planning and in our urban planning, and hear more voices, I think we have a better chance of adopting technologies, making the decisions, and then saving the planet.
Absolutely. It sounds like a successful company that you went and visited.
So,
And also doing small pilot projects, because
Right.
that can be a way to introduce something that is new or unusual to the public. And once they see the benefits and like it, they're going to support more of that, right? It's like, oh, wow, they did this thing to this particular area of town. And it's like, wow, the result is great. We should do more of it, you know? And so that
Right.
kind of like, so that's another way of building public support, right? If that's kind of what you need. You're building to something bigger down the line. So, yeah, I would say localities should like go in, or the state should support pilot projects, maybe do it in many places across the state so that they could be like a demonstration thing, right?
Right.
So how about we put in one EV bus in every town and then let people use it,
see it. Yeah.
see how great it is, and then they're gonna be like, we should do more, you know, or, you know, whatever it is
Well,
that you're trying
counties
to
like
do.
Arlington should just put in all the EV
Yes,
buses. and-
I mean-
but
Yeah.
'Cause we have the resources.
Hopefully we'll get there.
Yeah,
But certainly Arlington's an example that many others have followed.
yeah.
It used to be that corporate headquarters were more likely to locate in a Fairfax County or Montgomery County, and now people are starting to see the value that Arlington brings with its mixed-use
Mhm.
communities and its transportation infrastructure.
Mhm.
Multimodal
Yes.
transportation infrastructure.
There is a bill to create a fund to allow school systems across Virginia to acquire electric buses. Because schools are a great
Yes.
example where the current technology works extremely well. It's typically not a very long run, and they can recharge at the school. And if they take the next step and they put solar panels on the school, the buses
Yeah.
are not.
Charge off of
I
I
those
think the
solar
Arlington
panels.
schools are moving in that direction.
They are.
Yeah.
The other side of getting support that's important to me is in energy. we need to make sure that we have projects going on that don't just tell a fossil fuel worker in Virginia, we're gonna retrain you
Right.
for this job. But tell them, here's the job. What the project is going on now, you might need some retraining, but we need to commit to infrastructure in a very green way and renewable way that we can make that jump. Because I feel like a lot of people, the coal field workers and a lot of these industries, they work hard and they like to work, and they don't have the same invest in education and then there'll be a payoff down the road mentality. You know, it's in their DNA to work. So we need to create enough infrastructure projects now that's its short lead.
And I think you're seeing that in some areas of the Commonwealth, maybe not in traditional coal country, but where they're doing solar farms.
Right.
You see some conservative legislators now supporting that, both for the jobs and for the industry that it creates.
Right. And we definitely have infrastructure needs and energy needs. So let's think big, would be my advice.
You know, there's a lot of things that we should be doing in the space of addressing the climate, crisis. Planting trees or,
Right.
Building climate resiliency in many different types of environments, suburban, urban areas, buildings, efficiency and things like that. So let's throw the net wider instead of coal goes to solar. Could be solar, could be any number of other things
Right.
that is required. So
I think we're behind our neighboring states in terms of wind development.
Mhm.
If I'm thinking of the right numbers. Maryland, North Carolina both have made no progress in
I
wind.
think
A number of states
We're
have.
behind a number of states in the region. But that's going to be changing with this bill when it passes. At least will be moving us in the right direction.
We're behind Texas in terms of wind development.
Mm.
Now, I know it's a different geography, but Texas is
That's crazy.
I think an oil rig is their official state emblem,
Mhm.
Right.
and they're ahead of us in wind, so that's kind of embarrassing.
Yes.
But encouraging too.
It is encouraging in the sense that Texas is realizing
Mhm.
this is not just good for the planet, but it's also good for business.
Where I'm coming from, it starts way back. I think environmental issues always kind of been part of my life in a way. My mother was in environmental policy at the municipal level, and I grew up in Bangkok, Thailand for most of my youth, and it was very congested, a lot of traffic, very polluted, and even worse now, and a lot of trash problems. I remember just kind of seeing so much trash all the time. I think it's weird, yes, I do care about the earth environment in and of itself. I just see, all these beautiful places getting destroyed, of course, and I care about that. But I think for me, what really gets to my core is the injustice, in the sense of that this is happening because a few really small group of people on the planet is just over consuming all these resources, and they're getting rich or just consuming,
Right.
I mean, think of a buffet or whatever, right? You just eat so much food, but most of it is waste. It's wasteful, the sense of wastefulness of the consumption, right? You're taking way more than you actually need, right? Kind of like loading up your plate kind of thing. Meanwhile, there's so many people who are going without, who are having to struggle to just get enough, right? And it's not just food, but just all kinds of things. And just the sense of it not being fair, why is this happening, right? So that to me really drives my activism in this space, is that I think it's unfair, that the planet is being destroyed for really selfish reasons, there's a small group of people are getting this, and then the rest. While I think that really there's enough to go around. If we were to
Right.
if everyone just got a plate of just enough food for you to be satisfied, rather than just like piling it up like a buffet for this small group of people while everyone else is starving. Like, it's not, beyond possibility, I think,
Right.
And then most recently, that's what's gotten me even more antsy about this situation, is that I see the threat, obviously, over the decades I've been involved in this issue, worsening over time.
Right.
And now it's getting to the point where the disparity between the wealth and the people who are just taking way more than they need and leaving everybody else, it's getting worse, right? Further apart, more and more people are being pushed into this category of and it's a threat to our democracy. Because I don't think that we can sustain a free society with this going on.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, imagine what's happening in Australia happening everywhere, or right now. Like, I mean, and then sea levels rising too, and all this stuff. We're going to have climate refugees very soon. People are going to look out for themselves, number one. Like, in that scenario, I don't see, how can we even sustain the, just the normal functioning of our society, and making sure that people don't just kind of lose it. So that, to me, is really scary. That
Right.
Now we're getting to the point where this injustice is literally a threat to our our democracy and our ability to just, keeping some normalcy, I don't know,
Right.
and still be neighborly, still wanting to help each other, And we're already seeing it at this point, that our civil society is starting to crack, and racial disparities and all sorts of things, and fear of immigrants and things like that. It's anxiety. It's this
Right.
social anxiety that's kind of coming out, and that's not a healthy place to be.
I agree.
I think people are going to want their buffets. The question is, we can't hope that everyone's going to go on a diet and eat half. We have to make sure that our energy sources are clean. We have to make sure that our transportation policy is good. And eventually we may convince some people to eat less. I'm a vegetarian, but I'm not an evangelical vegetarian. I feel like if people want to learn about it themselves, both from health reasons and for environmental reasons, they may do so on their own. But that's going to be a hard issue for government to mandate.
I agree with you. Just to go back to your comment about Bangkok, and I spent a couple weeks in Jakarta a while back, and I thought that was the most traffic I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
And the week after that I was in Bangkok, and I realized, no, Bangkok's the most traffic I've ever seen.
Yeah.
For me, what shifted, because I've always had, I think, a fair amount of concern for the environment. But it used to be, I'm going back to when I was just a kid, it's very one issue. Like, go back far enough, it's like, well, let's get rid of DDT, 3 Mile Island happens. Okay, we got to deal with this. You can just go through it, and then it's realizing the comprehensive systemic threat to the planet just motivates me.